We are just a week away from the start of the 2025 Canadian Premier League season, the 7th season in this league's existence. And so, with pretty much all the moves for the offseason done, it's time to go and preview this CPL season. How do I think all the teams stack up, and who do I think are the front runners for all the awards? U21 Canadian Player of the Year award, Goalkeeper of the Year, Defender of the Year, Golden Boot, and Player of the Year. Starting right off of it, let's see where I think each of these teams are going to end up in the standings at the end of the season. Starting off in 8th place, I have Vancouver FC. Vancouver FC made headlines this offseason with some big transfers of youth players, notably Grady McDonald to Club Brugge in Belgium and James Cameron to the Colorado Rapids 2 in MLS Next Pro. However, in terms of incoming players, their haul was a little weak. They lost a lot of high-end talent on this team, notably Caden Chun, Gabriel Bitar, and Eamon Salouf, and didn't really bring in replacements for all of them. They did get Terran Campbell from Forge. That was their big signing in the offseason, and adding the CPL's all-time leading goal scorer is a good signing. However, they need Campbell to return to his form of 2022 and 2023. 2024 Terran Campbell was not good enough and was injured a lot and won't help this team get better. And also Hem alone doesn't cover for the fact that they lost multiple offensive pieces in Bitar and Salouf. Now, if Campbell has a return to his 2021 through 2023 form and Alejandro Diaz has a return to his best form in the Canadian Premier League, those two guys easily could combine for 20 plus goals for Vancouver FC and would have them pushing for a playoff spot. However, I think overall the talent that they brought in doesn't quite match the talent that they lost, and I think that Valor FC did get better, so I see Vancouver as falling to the bottom of the Canadian Premier League this season. Up to 7th, we have perennial strugglers Valor FC. Now, Valor FC have been probably the most disappointing Canadian Premier League team over the course of the whole league's existence, consistently finishing at or near the bottom of the league. And while I don't see that changing for this season, I am really starting to like what this team is doing. Femi Antonoglu, who was brought in last season, was a finalist for Defender of the Year, and he stays around this team. And they've also added Chris Twardek and Zachary Fernandez in fullback roles to accompany him. So this is a Valor team that is very strong in the fullback position out wide, and I'm really liking the back end that they're building there. Add in Rocco Romeo, another solid addition on the back end, and I'm just really starting to like what this team is building. Now, they lose Jordan Swabel, who scored 7 goals for them last season, so that leaves a bit of a question mark as to who is going to be the main goal scorer on this team. They need to find goals to replace his 7 last season and hopefully get more than just that if they want to be a competitor team for the playoffs. But in the back half of last season, well, they did have an atrocious start. They did only lose 4 of their last 14 games in the back half of 2024. So if they can roll that form into 2025, they all of a sudden are a playoff contending team and a competitive one at that. It's just making sure the whole season is at that level and finding goals to replace Swabel that will make this team a playoff contender. Moving on to number 6, we have the Halifax Wanderers. Now, the Wanderers, the team with the best game day atmosphere in the Canadian Premier League, probably had the most concerning off-season out of any Canadian Premier League team. Most notably, they lose Dan Nimick and Massimo Ferrin, 2 guys who have been basically the key figures in this team the past 2 seasons. 2 of not only their top goal scorers, but Dan Nimick, one of their best goal scorers because he's their penalty taker, and also by far their best defender. So 2 gaping holes in the lineup with those 2 gone. However, the addition of Rayan Yesley is a very solid one at goalkeeper. Thomas Mayer-Giguère is a solid center back, not quite a perfect replacement for Dan Nimick, but pretty damn good. And they get Adam Perlman and Alessandro Biello on loan from Toronto FC and CF Montreal respectively. Those 2 both could be U21 Player of the Year candidates in the Canadian Premier League. The big question with the Wanderers, though, are the play of Lorenzo Caligari and Sean Rea. If those 2 can reclaim their top form, Sean Rea his 2022 U21 Player of the Year form, and Lorenzo Caligari his 2023 form, which earned him a nomination for Player of the Year, this all of a sudden is 100% a playoff team. If those 2 are playing their best, this is a playoff team. However, if they're playing like they were last season, not so much. So if Rea and Caligari can elevate their level up to what we all know it can be, Wanderers can be very competitive this season. But there's a lot of ifs and a lot of question marks, and overall I think their incoming versus outcoming moves in the offseason did weaken them a little bit, which is such a shame because the Halifax fans deserve much better. But the Wanderers fringe on the cusp of the playoff team, in my opinion, this season. Definitely, if things go right, they can make it. Up to 5th place, I have York United. Now, York United had a very transitionary offseason. They lose the keys parts of their offense last season. Player of the Year winner Brian White and Mo Babuli both leaving to rivals Forge FC. However, they did do a good job of bringing GTA boys back to play for York, most notably Gabriel Bitar, Massimo Farron, and Luke Singh. They also lost Noah Abatna to Atletico Ottawa, which is a big loss. The 20-year-old center back was a finalist for U21 Player of the Year last year, so that's going to be a loss on the back end. Replacing him with Singh is pretty like for like right now, but I think Abatna has much more potential and could develop into one of the best center backs in this league. I think they're definitely still a cusp playoff team. However, overall, I think they did get slightly worse on paper coming into this season. It will be an interesting one for York and for Mauro Estacchio as head coach for the first time, but there definitely are things to be excited about on this York United team, and I would not count them out as a fringe contender. Moving up to number 4, we have Pacific FC. Pacific FC did a bit of getting the 2021 band back together this offseason. Caden Chun and Marco Bustos both return, who were key parts in that 2021 championship squad. Now, adding Bustos to a midfield that already had Sean Yun, also adding Aiden Daniels, I really like this team's midfield. I think they're going to need a bit more help from up top from Zanata. He only had 5 goals last season. They need more from their number 9 to be a truly competitive team this season, but back end midfield I both really like on this team. In net, they lose Emil Gazdov as he was transferred to CF Montreal, but they bring Max Anchor in on loan from the Whitecaps. Now, big shoes to fill for the young Max Anchor, but he definitely is a very promising young goalkeeper, and so he has an opportunity to really thrive right now with this Pacific team. In 3rd place now, I have Atletico Ottawa. Atletico Ottawa lost a couple key pieces of the super team in this offseason. Most notably, Ollie Bassett truly ends an era in Ottawa. Ollywood was well loved by the Atletico fans. And on top of that, they also lost Ruben Del Campo, who finished 2nd in the Golden Boot race last season. So 2 significant pieces of the offense is gone for Ottawa. However, they do bring in New Zealand international Monty Patterson at striker, and there's a lot of hype around this guy, and Ottawa's really excited for him, so I think he should be able to fill in those shoes pretty well. Also, the additions of Noah Abatna, Jonathan Grant, and Brett Levi are massive in the back end. Them surrounding Amir Didic should be very strong for Ottawa this season. They lose Rayan Yesley, but Nathan Ingham was their starter keeper anyways, so nothing really changes there. All in all, still a very solid Atletico Ottawa squad, and without Bassett, Manny Aparicio now is the main guy in the midfield. He is the man, so they paid him the biggest salary in the history of the Canadian Premier League when they signed him at the beginning of last season. It's time for him to step up and show it. Ottawa, in my opinion, clearly the number 3 team in the league coming into this season. I think they're clearly better than everyone below them. I don't think they're quite at the level of the big 2 in Forge and Cavalry, which we move on to now. With at number 2, I have Cavalry FC. Cavalry, fresh off being the first ever Canadian Premier League team to beat a Liga MX team in CONCACAF Champions Cup competition, come into this season with basically the same team as they had last year, except they lose Dan Klomp. And that is massive, because Dan Klomp is a 2-time back-to-back Defender of the Year winner and the 2023 Player of the Year winner, being the only defender in the history of the Canadian Premier League to win Player of the Year. No immediate replacement for Dan Klomp on the back end for Cavalry, so there is going to be a bunch of question marks about how that spot is going to be filled. Eric Kobza is a talented young defender, but again, no one quite at Klomp's caliber has been brought in or was in their youth system to step up and replace him immediately. Not much else to say about this team. Again, like, not very many additions, not very many subtractions beyond Klomp and Trafford, but overall, Cavalry is still one of the top 2 teams in the Canadian Premier League, even without Klomp. I just think they got a little bit worse this offseason, while Forge got better. And that's why in 1st place, I have Forge FC. Following the 2023 season, I said Forge needs to replace Manjikar James and Woobens Pacius if they want to be the best team still in the Canadian Premier League. And in 2024, they didn't really do that. They lucked out to having Kwasi Poku develop into one of the best strikers this league has ever seen, but he developed so well that he got transferred halfway through the season and they never replaced him, and they never really replaced James at center back, relying on Garvin Metusala to cover that role. And like, well, Garvin Metusala is good and now gone to the USL Championship, he wasn't quite at manager Car James's level. This season they have solved both of those issues. In at striker, Brian Wright, last year's Players Player of the Year winner, and in at center back, Dan Nimick. So, boom, massive Forge squad this season. And on top of that, Mo Babouli is back, which is just more offense. This Forge offense has Borges, Babouli, Wright, Choinière, crazy Forge offense. And that's before we even consider the fact that Benny Badibanya, who no one really knows what's happening with, might still be here. Rezar Rama is also back at right back, and they add experienced Serbian left back Marko Jevremovic at left back. Very strong Forge team everywhere around. They should far and away be the favorites to win this season, and dare I say it, they could potentially be the first team in Canadian Premier League history to win the double, because I don't see anyone else right now being quite on the level as Forge is coming into this season. However, with the extra roster turnover they have had compared to Cavalry, could be a slower start to the season for Forge than Cavalry, which could give Cavalry the edge in the regular season title race. Just throwing it out there. Moving on to the awards. Really quickly, just going to run through my top 3 contenders for each of these awards. For U21 Player of the Year, I have Noah Abatna as my favorite, Alessandro Biello in there, and Christian Greco-Taylor. Noah Abatna, as a center back, was a finalist for this award last season. He is still eligible. And moving on to an Ottawa team which should finish top 3 in the league. If he is a starting center back on a team that finishes top 3 in this league, he is basically a write-in for U21 Player of the Year. Alessandro Biello, if the Wanderers are to succeed, he is going to have a great season. And so if that happens, he definitely will be a contender for this at 18 years old. And Christian Greco-Taylor, guy, a lot of minutes at Pacific. He's, in the conversation. Whenever you see guys getting significant minutes at U21 age, they're definitely in the conversation for U21 Player of the Year. If Pacific has a solid season and he's getting a lot of minutes, yet again, guy is definitely a contender, however, not quite on the level as Abatna. Goalkeeper of the Year, I have Marco Carducci as the favorite, perennial favorite for Goalkeeper of the Year award. He probably, season in, season out, is one of the best goalkeepers in the Canadian Premier League. Rayan Yesley was a finalist for this award back in 2023, didn't get the minutes in 2024 with Atletico to be considered for it again, but I do think he's going to be the starting keeper at Halifax. He's going to face a lot more shots on that Halifax team than some of the guys on better teams in the league. So definitely a guy to watch out for in this, as he has the potential to keep Halifax in a lot of games this season. And finally, Nathan Ingham, again, just Ottawa's starting goalkeeper, and Ottawa has a fantastic back line coming into this season, so Ottawa should get a lot of clean sheets, which will definitely benefit Ingham in this race. Defender of the Year, we have Dan Nimick, Amer Didic, and Alex Akshionodi-Janssen. Now, Dan Nimick was always in the conversation for this award with the Wanderers, and now coming to a Forge team where they should be finishing at or near the top of the standings, Dan Nimick is going to be front and center in the Canadian Premier League this season. A good team performance on top of him just doing what he always did with the Wanderers should easily put him in the conversation for Defender of the Year. Amer Didic, perennially also a contender for this award, one of the best center backs in the Canadian Premier League, and again, the backbone of Ottawa's back line, definitely will get a shout if they finish top 3. And Alex Akshionodi-Janssen, a guy who has been such a big part of Forge's domination for so many years, if he's on the back line again, which it looks like he will be, yet again deserving of a nomination. To the Golden Boot, in risk of repeating last season, but I think that's probably what's going to happen. Tobias Warszewski I have as the favorite. Again, he's just been on such great form with Cavalry, and I think that's going to roll into this season. Monty Patterson replacing Ruben Del Campo up top at Ottawa. They up in Ottawa seem to be really excited about this guy, and Ottawa's a team that has a lot of very strong setup players, so if Monty Patterson is a half-decent striker, he'll score a boatload of goals with Aparicio and Tabla setting him up in Ottawa. And Brian Wright, so much wing and midfield talent around him in Hamilton with Borges, Choinière, Babouli, Becker. Brian Wright is going to be at the center of all of that, and if he scored 9 goals last season with York, he should be able to definitely increase that tally with Forge this season. And finally, the big one, player of the year. I think Manny Aparicio is the favorite Twin player of the year this season. With Ollie Bassett gone, Aparicio is the guy in Ottawa. He's the main creative attacking presence there. If Ottawa needs to succeed, they need Manny Aparicio at his best. I think that situation is really going to make him shine and definitely make him the favorite coming into the season to be player of the year if he can put up the performances that he needs to. Marco Bustos at Pacific, also a guy who is very well set up to perform this season. After a couple of years abroad in Sweden, he's coming back to Pacific, and if he plays like he did back in 2021, 2022, shoo-in for this award. He single-handedly could carry Pacific into the top 3 in the standings this season. And I mean, at one point he was the CPL's all-time leading goal scorer. So, you know, he can pot in many goals for that team and definitely put himself into position to be player of the year. And finally, Ali Musi. I think with Dan Klomp gone, Cavalry is going to need more offense to make up for the hole in their back end. And so Ali Musi has the potential to just become an offensive weapon this season and pop off if they're relying on him more for more offense. So definitely, if Ali Musi, has a fully healthy season and carries this Cavalry offense, especially without the presence of Dan Klopp at the back end, them still performing well because of offensive talent, definitely gives Musi a shot to win Player of the Year. So there you have it. That's how I think this Canadian Premier League season is going to shake out. Definitely a clear favorite in my mind in Forge FC this season. A little more clear than last year, where I think Forge, Ottawa, and Cavalry were all kind of pretty much on the same level coming into the season. But it's a long season and anything can happen. So we'll see how it goes. This should be a fantastic year of CPL football, and I hope we can enjoy it.